We are so fortunate this Shabbat to welcome one who is no stranger to our congregation or pulpit. Our cherished member, Susan Feit, has an impressive resume of a successful 30-plus year career as a social change agent. But when asked what she wanted me to say about her tonight, Susan answered, "Tell them simply, what is most important is that I work on equity, diversity, and inclusion here and in Israel. Locally, I am currently partnering with Barbara Hamley on the Virginia Symphony Orchestra's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative." Susan, well, we know that this critical work is so very far from simple, and we are grateful that you are leading us in doing it. Thank you so much for offering to speak to us this evening on the extremely relevant and timely topic, the urgency of now. So please welcome our very own OST member, Susan Feit.
Thank you, Rabbi Raz, and thank you, Cantor Jen. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight, but I also want to thank you for your leadership in these troubled days, and also for the inspiration that you continue to offer, no matter how difficult it is to do that with technology. It doesn't stop you. You don't stop for a beat. So I'd like to say good evening to all the congregants that are here tonight. And I want to share with you why I decided to volunteer. Actually, I called up Cantor Jen and Rabbi Raz and said, can I say a few words about the current state of our nation? It really is for my own reasons. You see, I know I have not done enough to speak out about the deeply ingrained racism in our nation. And I also know that in this time in history, that is simply unacceptable. I cannot sit on the sidelines and wait for others to do the work. I must stand up for what I believe in. So it was natural. I have to start here at home, in my community, Ohef Sholom, the place I belong. I start with my people, the Jewish people, a nation that understands what it means to be othered, discriminated against, and persecuted. A nation that has been called the chosen people. In my mind, we who have faced destruction time and time again have indeed been chosen to work on behalf of others, to work persistently and tirelessly towards justice. You see, I don't want my silence or inaction to be misinterpreted. I do not want to be complicit with ideas that I do not endorse, and that is why I am here tonight. It is the first time in my lifetime that I am old enough to witness a historical shift in attitudes about racial injustice. I do not want to miss this opportunity. I want to be on the right side of history. I want to back up my beliefs with action. I am here that I will do my best to engage in anti-racist behavior and help dismantle racist systems in our nation that allow some people to succeed while invisibly excluding others from opportunities and from justice. A system that allows people like me to live and prosper while others are incarcerated and being killed at alarming rates. This week's Parsha tells us something about that obligation. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm no religious scholar. So I'm going to leave the interpretation of this week's entire Torah portion to Rabbi Raz, to David Metzger, to other experts in that field. But as a social justice activist, I do want to touch just on one point. So let me bring you to the action. Let me set the stage. The Israelites are in the desert, and their conditions are tough. They complained to Moses that the food was better in Egypt. Yep, you heard me right. They complain and complain. Moses sees this group of fetchers, but he does not quite know what to do. It weighs him down. It seems too much to bear. If you ask me, even Moses becomes a fetcher himself, asking God, why have you placed the burden of this entire people upon me? I alone cannot carry this entire nation, for it is too heavy a burden. So Moses, arguably the greatest leader, Jewish leader of all times, is telling us that getting to the promised land is too heavy of a burden, even for him, if he is alone. He cannot fight for the ideal world by himself. And my guess is that he was probably also fed up with the complaints of discomfort he was hearing from his people. Now, I feel for Moses. He is trying to bring his people to freedom. He has brought them liberation, freed them from slavery, and all they have to say is that they don't like the new menu. The food was better before. Really? Think about it. The Israelites preferred the conditions they knew when they were slaves in Egypt to paying the price of going on a different diet. They have lost sight of what they are gaining, their liberation. Instead, they focus on the price they are paying. They can only focus on their journey, and it is hard. It is grinding. It is uncertain. The Israelites are wandering in a wilderness to an unknown future. But then think again, because should we really be surprised that the Israelites complain about their uncertain fate? Isn't that human psychology? Isn't that why we say better the devil you know than the devil you don't? The Israelites did not know what the other side looked like, so they complained. They felt sorry for themselves. They were mad at their leader. They gave up their beliefs. But even with all that fetching, Moses continued to lead his people through the desert. They kept heading toward the promised land, but they never did make it in. That generation was not able to make the changes necessary to enter a new state of being. They wandered for 40 years, waiting for a new generation to enter the promised land. But we do not have to be like the Israelites waiting for the next generation to enter the promised land. We need to get to work right now on building the more perfect union we know we can be. Friends, we are at an inflection point. Now, I know change is hard work and it never comes without a price, not without some risk and not without some discomfort. But that is what we must do if we want to move our country forward. Friends, there is work to be done. I feel the urgency of the moment in my very bones. Perhaps it is my legacy as a Jew, or maybe it is because I am the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. My parents witnessed the constant march towards fascism in their home country of Poland in the 1930s. It came as a steady decline, first stripping citizens of their civil rights, then of their human rights, and eventually culminating in genocide. In the 30s, people did not believe what they were seeing. Most people did not know what they could do to stop it. They thought it could not get any worse. But it did. My parents ran for their lives, securing refuge in the United States of America, a nation they have always considered the greatest country on earth. But recent events have shaken their confidence in the invincibility of our nation and the ability of its democratic principles to prevail. This is the first time my parents have ever been fearful for the demise of democracy in our country. My father often tells me it is a good sign that military leadership is not backing up calls to limit First Amendment rights. In fact, He talks about it almost any time we're speaking about current events. The implication that he is monitoring the US slide into dictatorship like he did in 1939 Europe sends a chill down my spine. I know democracies are not something to take for granted. They can disappear while good, busy people carry on with their lives, thinking what they do does not matter, thinking that they cannot do anything to change the system, no matter how unjust. But that is not the situation we are witnessing today. I look out at the streets filled with protesters night after night calling for change and have great faith that tens of thousands of people are doing what it takes to make our country better, stronger, and more just for more people, to make sure that the ideals of liberty and justice do not ring hollow for African Americans. George Floyd's murder is a moment of reckoning for our country. Trapped in our homes due to COVID-19, people everywhere watched on the television over and over almost 9 excruciating minutes of a policeman extinguishing the breath of an unarmed Black man with his fellow police officers as witness. This visceral image of white America on the neck of our Black brothers and sisters was the match needed to ignite a movement for racial justice. It is the event that has allowed so many of us white people to realize that racial justice is woven into the very fabric of our nation, and it is not going away. It has allowed us to see that we are part of the problem. It has allowed us to see that it is our obligation to do something. It means, friends, as uncomfortable as it might be to admit it, and even if we think racism is wrong, we white people have benefited from a racist system. All of us. Not just the bigots, not just other people, but me and every other white person listening in on this Zoom service. And we must be willing to own that fact if we want there to be change. I did not ask to receive the unearned privilege of being white, nor did you. I do not feel guilty that I have it, just like I hope you do not. But that does not mean that I am not aware of how much easier my life is because of the color of my skin, and I hope you do too. Now, sure, I've had hardship in my life, and I know that each and every person here also has hardship. But let us not confuse our individual hardships with unearned advantage simply for belonging to a different racial group. That, my friends, is white privilege, and we have to be able to name it and see it to change it. So why is that so hard? It is hard to address racial injustice because it is often invisible, like the smog that we breathe, that invisible or not, still pollutes our air. Take my family, for example. My parents were refugees. They came to this country with $20 in their pockets and worked hard for everything that they have. It would be easy to look at them and ask, why could they and other Jews like them get so far ahead when Blacks remain behind? There are many answers to that question, but time is short tonight. So let me give you just one example to illustrate how that happened right under our noses without most of us ever giving it a second thought. My father's big break came with his service in the US military. That is how he was fast-tracked to become a US citizen. When he was discharged, he received a free college education and a low-cost mortgage through the GI Bill. He still gets subsidized medicine from the VA administration. My father secured an MBA That, in turn, greatly increased his lifetime earning potential. My parents took out a mortgage to buy their first house and moved to a suburb known for its excellent school system. Every year, they deducted their mortgage on their tax returns. Eventually, they paid off their mortgage, acquiring wealth they could pass on to me and my sister. My sister and I attended one of the best high schools in the country. Growing up, I had no idea that my family had any particular advantages. I thought everyone had the same chance and that it was my parents' hard work alone that got us where we were. I never learned anything about the public policy that gave my family and our friends the head start we needed to build such prosperous lives. I was taught that the United States is a meritocracy where anyone can succeed if they just work hard enough. What I did not know at the time was that Black people in this country had a completely different experience. They were not included in public policies that helped with home ownership and higher education. Even in the case of the GI Bill, segregation, quotas, and discrimination meant that Black veterans did not have the same opportunities. More often than not, Blacks were not able to access college education due to strict quotas. They were not approved for mortgages and were denied the right to buy houses in many neighborhoods and suburbs. Instead, they rented apartments, or when lucky, were put in public housing. This meant that they could not take any tax deductions for home ownership. It meant that they were not able to acquire wealth at a time when home purchases fueled upward mobility in the country. It meant they had nothing to pass on to future generations. It meant that their children were not able to attend the country's best schools. It meant that we as white people have had an unfair advantage in this country. And it means that we have the obligation to acknowledge and address the historical injustice right here and right now. For too long, race has been used as a wedge to divide and segregate us. We cannot let that continue. We cannot be silent any longer. Every time we are silent or do not stand up when we see racial injustice, we are complicit with racism. Friends, it is not an option to be silent right now. We can do better than that. I am optimistic that bipartisan calls for police reform and conservative voices like those apologizing to Colin Kaepernick for not understanding his patriotic nonviolent protest mean that the tide has finally turned. We cannot lose this moment. It is our opportunity, Democrats and Republicans, to stand on the right side of history by working for fundamental change to address generations of injustice. It is our duty to be allies as Black activists call for long-needed reforms to ensure that Black lives matter. Their calls extend far beyond reform in the way we police. It is a cry for people of all colors to finally have equitable access to opportunity. And I have news for you. It is a call for help for the long haul. We cannot be like the Israelites in the desert, complaining along the way. We have to be there, even when it is hard, even when it is uncomfortable and when it might feel dangerous, even when it makes us feel bad or if it makes us feel guilty. Friends, we are fighting for the promised land. We are fighting for a more perfect union. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. told us our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. It is our chance to make sure our lives matter. It is time to take bold steps to reverse the impact of generations of policies that favor white people at the expense of others. It is no longer controversial or partisan to say Black Lives Matter. It is also not enough just to say it. It is time to show that our country and each one of us here really means it. Thank you for your attention, and Shabbat Shalom.